Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Smart Knowledge U vlog. Don't believe your own hype. Before I begin, I just want to take a very short moment to let people know that I have ordered a professional mic and that you will only hear an echo in future vlogs until my new mic arrives. So hopefully maybe there'll only be one or two additional vlogs with the echo that a lot of you have complained about. So you should be happy to know that that problem's been taken care of. So today I like to take this opportunity to incorporate one of my favorite topics, mixed martial arts, and the recent stunning upset of Holly Holm over Ronda Rousey at UFC 193 into applicable lessons for the global currency war. So a lot of you probably going to wonder how I'm going to wrap this topic into investment strategy, but I am, so just remain patient and for through the first portion of this topic, and hopefully for any mixed martial arts fans out there, hopefully there are a number of you that listen to my podcasts and my vlogs that you will find this topic interesting. So for those of you that don't follow mixed martial arts, Ronda Rousey is widely considered to be the best pound-for-pound MMA fighter in the world by far, before she recently lost to Holly Holm this past Saturday in UFC 193 held in Melbourne, Australia. So even though Holly Holm was a 19-time world boxing champion who had held multiple world titles in both the WBA and WBC and obviously possessed far superior tactical boxing skills than Ronda Rousey, I believe, became a victim of her own hype. I believe that Rousey's belief in her own hype as unstoppable and kind of like, I guess, a Terminator-like machine in her weight class in the UFC, I believe that actually came from her coach, Edmond Tarverdyan, as evidenced by Tarverdyan's claims that Rousey could win an Olympic gold medal in boxing right now. And that was a belief that was outed this past weekend is crazy, as Holm surgically dissected Rousey's defense and repeatedly had no problem penetrating her defense. So this belief in one's own hype actually extended even to the MMA fan base, as so much money was placed on Rousey in this past weekend's fight that the betting line actually went as high as putting Holm as a 20-1 underdog by the time fight night arrived, despite the fact that Holm was, again, like I said, a 19-time world boxing champion. So that 20-1 underdog on the betting line was just insane as far as I was concerned. So again, Rousey's coach Tarverdyan's enforcement of Rousey's hype, I think, was even evident in Rousey's own pre-fight interviews, in which she claimed that she was the best female striker in the world based upon her belief that MMA striking was very different from boxing striking. But I do know that you can't throw elbows and you can't throw knees in boxing, and that's something that most boxers are woefully unprepared for. But Holm had, spent a lot of time in her conversion from professional boxing into mixed martial arts, and in fact had head kicked a lot of her opponents into oblivion. So it's not like Holly Holm was a neophyte in the mixed martial arts world, as she put in her time and put in her blood, sweat, and tears into transitioning from professional boxing into mixed martial arts. I don't really know why Rousey would have stated that powerful precision boxing punches aren't going to translate into getting one's face smashed in mixed martial arts as well, especially since MMA fighters wear 4-ounce gloves versus the 8 or 10-ounce gloves typically worn by professional boxers. So I believe that part of it was Rousey just buying into her trainer's hype. And another reflection that Rousey might have bought into her own hype was her statement just a few weeks ago that she could defeat any woman in her weight class with just one hand. Although, obviously, of course, Rousey might have been engaging in deliberate hyperbole to sell the upcoming fight with Holm, and that could have been the reason she stated that as well. But in defeat, Rousey was thoroughly outclassed by Holly Holm in the striking game. And at one point during the second round, she threw a wild left hook, which Holm easily ducked, causing Rousey to collapse to one knee off balance. And although on the surface level it may sound like I'm knocking Rousey when she's down, that by no means is the case, because I love Ronda Rousey's attitude and her confidence, and I thought she was a great champ, and I believe actually has a very, very strong chance of becoming a champ once again, a two-time champ. I'll get into this more in a moment, but I just thought she became a victim of her own hype, and there's a massive difference between having an overwhelming belief in yourself, which I believe is absolutely necessary to become the best at anything, and falling victim to your own hype. So Rousey had an unbelievable work ethic and an overwhelming belief in herself that I believe was absolutely necessary for her success. But unfortunately, she combined this with the belief in her own hype, which was the trigger for her downfall this past Saturday night in Melbourne. And I don't have a problem with Rousey's boasts, though many others obviously do, as they seemed immersed in schadenfreude after her loss. And apparently there are many people out there that had massive problems with what they perceived to be Rousey's arrogance. And the reason, I'll tell you the reason I never really had a problem with Rousey's boasts is that you have to believe you're the best to become the best and to achieve the level of success that she achieved. Because you have to remember that UFC President Dana White once said that there would never be a woman fighter in the UFC. So he didn't even say there, possibly might be women fighters in the UFC in the future, but he said there would never be a woman fighter in the UFC. So without Ronda Rousey's determination to break that glass ceiling, there would be no Holly Holm UFC champion today. So I think you have to give an immense amount of respect to Ronda Rousey as a pioneer that forever changed the field for women fighters in mixed martial arts. And also, she changed the whole fee structure for female fighters in mixed martial arts, because Rousey has stated that she's the highest paid mixed martial artist today. Not the highest paid female mixed martial artist, but the highest paid male or female fighter in mixed martial arts, which one would really see as unfathomable just a few years ago, because, again, Dana White stated there would never be a female fighter in the UFC. So, for those of us that have never sat down with Rousey and never spoken to her on a one-on-one basis, which is almost every single one of us that has an opinion on her, we have no idea if her boasting is just shrewd showmanship to boost sales and attendance of her fights, because there are many UFC fighters like Chael Sonnen, for example, never really had top-tier mixed martial arts skills, but that consistently received title fights that were undeserved title fights, in my opinion, based upon solely his ability to sell himself as a villain to the champion at the time. A lot of people blasted Chael Sonnen for using histrionics and theatrics to gain what they felt were undeserved title shots, but there's no way that you can compare Chael Sonnen to John Jones or to Anderson Silva or to Ronda Rousey, who were all considered undisputed pound for pound best fighters in their weight class. So in that sense, you can't compare the boasting of someone like Chael Sonnen to the boasting of someone like Ronda Rousey. If you have even a sliver of doubt that you'll fail, then you'll never become the champion of anything. A lot of people that have never risked losing anything do not understand this concept and are hypercritical of those that exude such confidence. And although there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, unless one has actually risked everything financially by putting their life savings on the line into starting a business and leaving the comfort of a high-paying corporate job, or one has risked being physically brutalized by engaging in physical combat with someone with superior physical skills, then one really has no right to criticize any level of boasting from someone else that has placed themselves in that position, as this person cannot possibly understand the blood, sweat, and tears and the commitment and the discipline that goes into becoming the best in the world at something, and that goes into risking everything you've earned your whole life. Even in my limited martial arts training, I mean limited because even though there's a time I train 15 to 20 hours a week, that's really only 3 hours after an exhausting work day of 10 hours every day. So there's no way that training 3 hours a day that I would ever be able to compete with a professional fighter that's, at the top of their game, that's training 8 hours a day, that sometimes has 5 training sessions a day, and working with a professional nutritionist to ensure that their body is basically running on all cylinders and firing on all cylinders. I never had those kind of delusions. And even though, I fought and sparred on a consistent basis, and people got badly bruised and hurt, and I witnessed people suffer broken noses and broken bones and real significant injuries during our sparring sessions. That still pales in comparison. I have no delusions of my skill level, and I know that pales in comparison to the level of commitment necessary to become a professional fighter. So knowing that and understanding that, because I've been through just a fraction of that fire that's, necessary, and there are times I trained so hard I threw up and could hardly stand after training. It's astounding to me how I've encountered so many men out there that gloat in a professional fighter's fall or make statements about how terrible a fighter someone is once they lose when they've been a champion. I mean, they've been a champion. That means they've been the best in the world at what they do. And people want to make comments like, oh, she's nothing or he's nothing, when they themselves have never trained a single day in their entire life or ever engaged a skilled fighter in a real fight, because I don't consider someone that's engaged in a fighter with 0 skills in a street fight as really having been in a real fight. And certainly I've heard men that have never fought a single fight in their entire life call Anderson the Spider Silva a fraud after he lost to Chris Weidman. And again, those same ridiculous comments came out of the woodwork after Rousey lost this past weekend to Holly Holm, and that is just ludicrous. And even in my years of sparring sessions, and I'm talking like just amateurs, right? Because no one that I sparred with had ever fought professionally, although I did train with people that fought in underground fights in Los Angeles, in the underground fighting scene. But, I came across my fair share of men with huge egos and 0 real fighting experience that would enter our dojo with a belief in their own hype, because perhaps they had won a few street fights against men with equally terrible fighting skills. And often our instructor would let other students put these braggarts in their place, as you could tell they had never been in a fight with anyone of any skill level, as all you would have to do is just wait for them to get punched and struck once by someone that really knew how to punch with power, or wait for someone to get taken down to be put in a chokehold that they had never experienced before, because you would immediately see the level of panic sweep over their face. I mean, literally, you could see the sense of panic that would come over these people once they were engaged by a skilled fighter. So Rhonda certainly gets a pass because she was a champion for a long time. Now I'm just curious to see how Rhonda reacts from this loss. But we all know, because we know anyone that's a champion has a heart of a lion, whether it's Rhonda, whether it's Chris Weidman, whether it's Joanna Jacek, who's a strawweight champion, that they will come back strong and work harder than ever. If you watch the weigh-ins, though, you did see Rhonda lose her cool with Holly Holm, which illustrated, to me at least, I took that as a sign that Holly had already got inside Rhonda's head. So I think Rhonda realized deep down inside that this was going to be the toughest fight of her career, no matter what she said publicly, because otherwise I don't think she would have lost her cool at the weigh-ins. And the weigh-ins actually might have been the point where she mentally lost the fight, because I think it revealed that she had doubts, and that she may have doubted that she was ready for Holly Holm, and maybe doubted that her training camp had not been adequate to address the holes in her fight game. So, during her fight with Holly, Rhonda again showed, the weaknesses in her game that stood out in her film that really hadn't hurt her at all in the past, because she hadn't fought anyone as skilled as Holly Holm that could exploit her weaknesses. But you could see weaknesses, because you could spot her lack of lateral movement when being attacked. You could spot the fact that she always attacked her opponents in a linear fashion and didn't really work her angles too much. And maybe it was, like I said, simply because she didn't need to work her angles. She didn't need to move laterally to get away from her opponent's attacks, because her skill level was so superior that they could compensate for her weakness and not really endanger her in her previous fights. So in watching and seeing some of those potential, because we never really knew if those were real weaknesses were Ronda, but those potential weaknesses were exploited by Holly Holm, because Holly Holm did feint when Ronda attacked her in a linear fashion. She did sidestep and then counter strike, and she was very successful in exploiting Ronda's weaknesses that came off on film from her previous fights. So Holly seemed to game plan exclusively for Ronda's weaknesses and seemed to really work on blocking Rousey's judo throws, which all showed up in her fight. Her hard work all showed up in her fight, as Ronda attempted a hip throw and instead she was taken down by Holly Holm. So on the other hand, Rousey's coach seemed inexplicably not to specifically game plan for Holly Holm's strengths at all. And I know Rousey will be back, and she may again even beat Holm in the future as she works on her weaknesses, instead of just buying into the hype that she was the best in the world and no one could ever beat her. And it was a classic case, I believe, buying into her coach's hype, her coach Edmund Taraverdian's hype of her, and failing to adapt and change as the situation called for. So what does this all have to do with making smart decisions with wealth preservation strategies during our banking currency wars? I will connect the dots in just a few minutes, so bear with me just for a few more minutes. But first, I want to discuss the fact that winning is most certainly a mindset adopted by all of those that are successful. And as all of you that watch my channel for a while know, I don't believe that success by any means is based strictly upon monetary success alone, although this has become the de facto definition of success by society today. But to me, someone that is truly happy with their life and has less material wealth is far more successful than someone that is rich as F but miserable. And I guarantee you there are plenty of people that fit this latter bill, as I've had many of these people as clients when I was working for a Wall Street firm a decade ago. I believe that winning is a mentality and that you must learn to block out all doubt. In the past, for example, I've had friends that have told me, I want to try this, and if I fail, at least I know I tried my best. And my response to my friend's declaration was to tell my friend they must delete all negative thoughts of even possible failure from their mind if they truly desire success, because negative thoughts would provide a big barrier from my friend reaching their goal, reaching his goal. And I told them that it's natural to have doubts when venturing into the unknown, because I certainly had my doubts when I ventured into the unknown of combat sports, or I ventured into the unknown of starting my own company. But it's undeniable belief in oneself that is a prerequisite and necessary ingredient for success. And this belief can be cultivated simply by working on expunging all negative thoughts on a daily basis and on concentrating on positive beliefs. So in other words, winning is a habit, and I highly believe that winning is an attitude that can be cultivated over time. And I believe you must have no doubts of failure when you're attempting to achieve something very difficult. Otherwise, if you believe that you can always fall back on plan B in a worst case scenario, guess what? Your worst case scenario will become your reality. And believing, though, again, okay, I want to counter with this point. Believing in yourself alone does not mean you'll have success, because a lot of people believe that too. They think, oh, if I just think positive thoughts, then I don't really have to put in the hard work and the daily grind to succeed. No. Of course, belief in yourself alone can be delusion, right? So you have to put in the hard work. But this belief, this undeniable belief in yourself is extremely important in the case that you fail during your first attempt, and maybe even fail in your first couple of attempts to achieve your goals, because your adopted beliefs about yourself will greatly impact how you process your failure and greatly influence whether your next attempt will be successful or not. Because if you fail and during the course of your failure you never believed that you would ever succeed to begin with, then your chance of success in future endeavors is greatly diminished because one will believe that the outcome of your pursuit and the outcome that manifested is the outcome that you deserved. On the other hand, if you have supreme belief in oneself and fail during one's first attempt at something, one is much more likely to view that first failure as only a temporary speed bump that will delay inevitable success. So in other words, during the second attempt at achieving whatever this goal is, you will have a much greater possibility of success than during your first attempt. We can always take our failures and learn from them, but we first must rid ourselves of all doubts and all thoughts of failure in order to succeed. And on the same topic, I've been asked about people that state that they've never failed in anything that they've ever tried. And someone states this, all that means to me is that this person has never tried to achieve anything difficult in their life and has built up walls of limitation around himself or herself to protect himself or herself mentally from the possibility of ever failing in the pursuit of something extremely difficult. So how do these topics translate into failure to develop intelligent investment strategies? Well, let me tell you, as a corollary to someone that remains conservative in all their decisions in life because of the fear of failure, or the person that believes their own hype and therefore remains inflexible in their thinking and in their approach to new information and their ability to incorporate this new information into their existing game plan, is the person that remains committed to false beliefs about money and capital markets. Why is that? Why do I compare the unsuccessful investor that fails to recognize and seize new information and instead rejects new information to hold onto outdated beliefs in their system to someone that believes in their own hype? Well, it's basically the stubbornness and pride that precedes the fall. So there's a certain level of stubbornness and pride that is inherent in someone that believes their own hype, as well as inherent in someone that is so inflexible that they refuse to consider that new information that is presented to them could possibly be correct. In my last blog article, I discussed the typical Ivy League graduate that rests on the laurels of his or her educational pedigree, which basically I mean his or her achievement of attaining and securing a diploma from a top-tier university. Because often when you engage these people in arguments, their favorite justification for being correct in an argument is a false and hollow self-endorsement of "I went to Yale" or "I went to Oxford," followed by the accusatory question, "Where did you go to school?" As if an academic pedigree actually makes them correct by the default of entitlement and privilege. However, there's a person even worse than this typical Ivy League graduate with a self-inflated assessment of his or her own intelligence and importance. And that is a person with zero experience in a subject area that believes he or she is correct over the opinion of someone with decades of experience in that specific topic or field. For example, even though I spent over a decade of watching and learning on a daily basis what moves gold and silver prices, I'm consistently challenged by people that have no experience with this topic but are merely armed with the information attained in an MBA degree from a prestigious university that want to insist I am wrong. Again, please refer to my blog article titled "The Problem with Education Today" for more insight into why so many students today have adopted this inflexible mindset that leads them to believe they are correct without having engaged in any real exploration of the topic they are so sure they know inside and out. And I will put the link to that article in the YouTube description below. Many business school professors that teach within the institutional academic system actually encourage their students to adopt this type of inflexible mindset that unfortunately limits and retards a student's intellectual growth as she or he transitions from a university graduate into adulthood. In any event, I find people like this very similar to the delusional warriors that believe they can knock someone out without ever having learned any type of tactical fighting skills, and without ever having actually physically engaged anyone in a prolonged fight before. So this is the type of hubris that precedes the fall. So for example, my social media team often informs me that people that pose questions, that challenge my views on my videos or my blogs, don't even bother to perform a simple search of my blog or YouTube channel to see if I've already answered the oppositions that they posed. So most times they tell me that I've already addressed their opposition in previous information I've posted. Now, I've been educating myself on how the global financial system really works for over 2 decades now, and people that often question me have literally engaged in no self-education at times about the same topics. I believe that simply a privileged university education entitles them to throw around unsubstantiated accusations without any evidence to back up their claims. Now, by no means, don't misunderstand my argument here. I'm not saying that I'll always be right, even if I've studied a topic for 10 years, because I'm sure there are quantum physicists out there that have worked on a thesis for 10 years, only to be exposed to new research from a colleague that disproves their 10 years of research. So the length of time studying a topic does not necessarily mean that one will always be correct. In fact, on the fact sheet for my soon-to-be launched Smart Wealth Academy, I explicitly state that someone can study a topic for many years, but if that person has only been exposed to wrong information, then his or her conclusion might very well be wrong, versus someone that only has studied a topic for a few weeks if that person has access to the right information. But too many of us believe our own hype that our pedigreed academic background gives us the right to challenge others without doing an inch of heavy lifting ourselves. Over the years, again, my social media staff has proven this point over and over again during our weekly meetings when they inform me that in an overwhelming number of cases I've already answered and deconstructed a person's objection to facts I've presented in my blogs or in my vlogs, and that particular person raising the objection was too lazy to perform just 10 minutes or probably at most 20 minutes of research on my website or on my YouTube channel to discover the answers I've already presented. We always have the right to challenge someone else's viewpoint, but that right, as it is in the octagon or in the boxing ring, is one earned by blood, sweat, and tears put into investigating and learning a topic. And too many times, people increasingly exercise this right that they believe to be a privilege without wanting to ever even lift their pinky finger. I'm not referencing people that respectfully ask questions, as I always conclude all my vlogs with a plea to remain intensely curious. My comments only apply to those that challenge not just my views, because that's just the small picture and the insignificant picture, but this also extends to people that challenge other people's podcasts, topics, other people's vlogs, other people's blogs that obviously have zero experience in the topic that they are challenging. For example, since I began this podcast with the topic of mixed martial arts on a lot of mixed martial arts fights, for example, just the Rousey home fight or the Jacek Latorno fight, or the comments that people will post after the upcoming Conor McGregor-Jose Aldo fight. A lot of these comments, people mock the fighter's skill set. And yes, I know a lot of the comments are just from trolls that are trying to get a rise out of people, but you can actually tell that a lot of the comments are posted by people that are serious, that actually believe in what they say when they show disdain for a fighter's skill set. But you can tell from the content of their comments that they actually have never trained in mixed martial arts themselves. And I think that's a dangerous thing. And the reason why I believe it's a dangerous thing when people see the right to challenge someone without having any experience in the field as a privilege instead of something that's earned by actually having experience in that field is because it heavily detracts away from really constructive arguments where people can actually learn from listening to debate, and it really draws the attention away from constructive, logical, informative debates to uninformative and disinformation and malinformed viewpoints. So I've been wrong in the past. I happily admit that. I'll be wrong again in the future, and I'll admit that as well. But I always challenge my belief system to test its veracity. I don't really ever remain static in my viewpoints and just believe because I've been right more times I've been wrong in the past that I will continue to do so in the future, because you always have to challenge your present belief system to remain relevant. However, I only challenge my current belief system with opposition beliefs presented by those that have already engaged in heavy lifting themselves, as I think that is the intelligent way to challenge one's beliefs. So in concluding, let me discuss that a lot of prominent hedge fund managers have performed poorly this year. And I think, again, that's an extension, an illustration of people believing their own hype. Most, but not all, of the poorly performing hedge fund managers this year have attributed the gains they reaped during the past few years not to foolish, destructive central banker QE policies and banker HFT algorithms that artificially inflated share prices, but to their own ability to pick stocks that outperformed when clearly that was not the case, as most of the returns in the US stock market came on the backs of just Momo stocks. And as I stated, it was clear in some cases that with some hedge fund managers, they did have more skill that contributed to their hedge fund yields year after year. But that was the exception to the rule, because as I've already stated, the rise of the US stock market in the past few years has come on the back of just a handful of Momo stocks that every single hedge fund manager owns. So when you have Momo stocks rising based upon no fundamentals, but just on HFT algorithm manipulation, then that stock is going to rise regardless of what a manager thinks about that particular stock. So over the past few years, S&P 500 mostly rose on the fraud of corporate share buybacks and Enron-like accounting that led to positive glowing headlines about many corporations that in reality were experiencing plummeting revenues and engaging in massive employee layoffs. When you have a CEO, Reed Hastings of a hedge fund favorite Momo stock Netflix, publicly state that he had no idea why the share price of Netflix shares were continuing to rise earlier this year. This should have been a clear indication to everyone that much of the share price behavior of US stocks had decoupled entirely from reality and from fundamentals. Furthermore, if you go back just 15 years ago to the year 2000, the S&P 500 has only returned nominal gains of 30.26% over the last 15 years, which works out to an average annual return of 1.78% per year. So I know that most managed funds do not include the terrible performance of the S&P 500 from 2000 to 2002 and do not include the crash in 2008. Instead, start reporting their performance sometime after 2009 to artificially inflate their returns to like a 90% return or something ridiculous, because by excluding the crash years of the past 15 years, which almost none of these managed funds were completely out of the stock market in 2008. Almost none of them were out from 2000 and 2002, but they want to pretend like they were out of the market during that time. So if you include those years, then you'll see that their average return over the past 15 years was around a measly 1.78%, because most of them just mimicked the return of the S&P 500 index during that time period. Now, I'm not criticizing anyone for making mistakes, because all of us, including yours truly, have made mistakes. But when I say don't believe your own hype, the greater question one must answer is if one illustrates the ability to learn from one's mistakes in the past. So I certainly made crucial mistakes in 2013 by relying on data that turned out to be heavily falsified by JP Morgan bankers, and for which the Securities Exchange Commission fined JP Morgan bankers a measly $650,000 in 2014. And this year, even though gold and silver has remained weak throughout 2015, and gold and silver mining stocks have plunged from their January highs by nearly 50%, which is pretty similar to the losses they suffered in 2013. However, this year, unlike 2013, all of my fee-based services have returned a positive yield year to date. Why? Well, again, it's because I learned from my mistakes in 2013, and after that year, I vowed never to repeat those mistakes, and since then, we have not repeated those mistakes. Every year since I've launched my fee-based services in 2007, I've always exited markets completely for periods of time and shorted gold and silver for periods of time each year. 2013 was the only year during our 9 years of operation that made the mistake of not shorting gold and silver at some point during the year. Because despite the faulty JP Morgan banker data that I referenced to make my decisions, since I had a lot of success in past years, I really started believing my hype. So that year, even though I suspected that the JP Morgan data I was relying on heavily to make strategic decisions was totally falsified, as was later proven in 2014, for some reason I can't really explain, I didn't trust my gut, and that turned out to be a fatal mistake that year. So instead of shorting gold and silver markets as I had done every prior single year, I decided to remain long in gold and silver the entire year. So perhaps that year I believed my own hype, and this is how believing our own hype will cause even the most intelligent among us to make some really stupid decisions. Okay, so that concludes today's podcast. For mixed martial arts fans out there, let me know if you like my breakdown of the mistakes Rousey's coach made that led Ronda to be woefully unprepared this past weekend to handle Holly Holm, as being very similar to the mistakes we as investors make that leads to our failure to understand the fraud inherent in global stock, monetary, and commodity markets. And as always, until next time, so long and remain intensely curious.